Mind over matter. I'm sure you've heard that expression, probably used that expression. And just think how dualistic that is, how divorced from reality that is. Mind over matter. Very Cartesian at the very least, you know. My mind is very separate up here, and it's got the power, and I've got dominate matter, which is kind of separate from me under here. The thinking part and the extended part, to use Descartes' phrase. Well, I've been reading, and again, Chad is responsible for this, Ilia Deleuze's, the Franciscan sister who's a theologian but also a scientist. So, she gave a lecture last year on spirituality and hunger for wholeness. We do hunger for wholeness, you know, not these dichotomies and these separations and conflicts even, you know, between these supposedly disparate elements, you know, of our own being and of the world. You know, she treats it very well, mentioning Descartes, but also, you know, going through a little bit of the history, you know, of course, the Platonic, you know, thing, the separation, you know, of mind and body, where the body was the tomb, even for the soul, and she. But Zen and Christianity both, you know, have this sense of, should have this sense of unity here. She spends a little time with the Neoplatonists, with Plotinus. If you know anything about him in the 3rd century, this notion, the different levels of reality, but that they're all interconnected. So despite the fact, if you will, that he was a Platonist, you had a sense of the different levels of reality. The Enneads is this great work. I remember studying it. You had, of course, the body, matter. You had material creation. Then you had the world soul. When she speaks about this, the world soul. So not just souls, you know, scattered here and there, but the world soul. You know, the sense of the wholeness of all the material creation. But then also in that, above that, you had the nous, not nous. Nous in Greek means mind, you know, noetic. You know, reminds me of the nous here of tear. You know, so you have this level of spirit, of mind, but you know, more than just my little mind. Just as we'll see shortly in Buddhism, it's not just my mind. You know, it's Buddha mind. It's a Christ consciousness, if you will. That nous, and then above that, there's this non-duality. There's this one, the one, as Plotinus calls it. The point is, they're all, you know, interpenetrating and interconnected, and through mystical experience, through practice, you can experience and connect all these levels. I remember when I was studying the Kabbalah, I'm pretty sure I'd be willing to bet that Plotinus was influenced in Alexandria by the Jewish school there, Philo and others, who had the 4 levels of reality in the Kabbalah. So the Kabbalah also has this, the Jewish mystical tradition has the same sense of the interconnectedness of all these levels. You can distinguish them, but you can't separate them. And certainly not in practice. The practice is to be able to join them and experience them all together. And the medievals, you know, the great theologians like Bonaventure, you know, the really enlightened ones in the Middle Ages had the strong sense of the chain of being, how they're all interconnected. And she even quotes later on St. Francis as a good example of that, brother, sun, you know, sister, moon, and all this, that where it's all interconnected. There isn't a dichotomy among them. Cynthia Bourgeault, in her book on the Holy Trinity and the Law of Three, quotes the great masterwork, Meditations on the Tarot, which I believe I've mentioned before. But she quotes a wonderful passage that struck me very much too when I read it, which is very much in this vein. She says, modern science, and we're going to come to that in a second, modern science has come to the understanding that matter is only condensed energy. And of course, Einstein, E equals mc squared, right? I mean, energy and matter are interchangeable. That's where you get atomic bombs and all this stuff. Matter is only condensed energy. which, moreover, he says, was known by alchemists and hermeticists thousands of years ago, because they had the strong sense of it all being interconnected. It's, it's just condensed or coagulated, energy, but it goes up. It goes up and down the whole scale, as he goes on to say. Sooner or later, science will discover that what it calls energy is only condensed psychic force. So the soul and energy, which discovery will lead, he goes on to say, in the end, to the establishment of the fact that all psychic force is the condensation, purely, simply, of consciousness, spirit. So spirit, new soul, energy, matter, all just levels of the same thing. It's all energy, but at different levels of condensation or evaporation, or whatever you want to call it. So there is this strong sense of it all being directly interconnected. And that's so reassuring and challenging too, so we can begin to experience that and facilitate that experience. Now we haven't really, in recent centuries, not done very well. The Enlightenment philosophy's gone back. Kant got all stuck in his head. And then in the 19th century we had Hegel saying, well, everything is mind. Everything is mind and spirit. Everything. And then of course, as soon as you say everything is spirit, then someone can come along and say, no, everything is matter, which is exactly what Marx did. So here you go again, spirit, matter, and you're back to the old nefarious dichotomies. And of course, both of those tendencies are quite nefarious. We've had plenty of testimony to that in the 20th century. So where do we, well, hopefully a healthy Christianity and a healthy Zen, but what's fascinating about her presentation of Ilias is the return of mind to matter. Chapter 3. Is matter conscious? So she's approaching it from a scientific point of view. And scientists, remember the Heisenberg, the uncertainty principle, that you can't observe something and it can't be objective, so the subjective observance of something changes it itself, so that there's a human conscious element in matter itself. So that was the first clue, in modern scientific terms, of the interrelatedness here. But she goes a little further. Well, in fact, she quotes these quotes blew me away. Max Planck, Planck's constant, the theoretical physicist who initiated quantum theory and won the 1918 Nobel Prize in Physics, said, I can't believe he said this, he said, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. Sounds like Augustine in the Divine Mind or something, I consider matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Another physicist, Sir James Jeans, wrote, the stream of knowledge is heading toward a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine. This is a physicist talking here. Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. And he's not talking about theism here, huh? He's talking about, mind, whatever. Get over it, he says. Accept the inarguable conclusion. The universe is immaterial, mental and spiritual. Physicist. Wow. So apart from consciousness, there can't be even physical matter that they're proposing. It's called the participatory anthropic principle. Participatory anthropic principle. Without us, there can't even be reality. Interesting way to take that. Consciousness literally creates the world. Bertrand Russell, of all people. We know nothing about the intrinsic quality of physical events, except when these are mental events that we directly experience. In having conscious experience, we learn something about the intrinsic nature of physical stuff. For conscious experience is itself a form of physical stuff. Conscious experience is itself a form of physical stuff. So you can't distinguish mind and matter and consciousness. Because they're just concepts that we've made up for a certain level of vibration, if you will. But as soon as you separate them out, and we'll see that in a second in the koans, you're going to get into trouble. So is consciousness the ground of everything? In his 1950 Nobel Prize speech, Bertrand Russell said that mind and matter are basically the same thing. And go back and read it. Who would have thought? He said we're calling it a dual aspect monism. This is what, I'm not sure who made that up, but a dual aspect monism. There's only one reality, it's energy, monism, but it's dual aspect. It has different manifestations. It's kind of like non-duality. It's not one and not two. Dual aspect monism. So, so we have to be within the thing to be able to understand it. And then they go on to say, another physicist says, that even inanimate life has some form of consciousness. And modern Thomists, Catholic theologians and philosophers saying the same thing. Everything has consciousness on some level. Every aspect of being is true at its own level. So even at the level of a rock, there's some kind of consciousness. So mind is in that, and matter is in us, and it's all connected. Remember when Jesus says, when the Pharisees say, silence these followers of yours who are crying out, hail the King of David. And what did Jesus say according to the Gospel of Luke? If they were silent, the stones would cry out. That's how and why. Because they do have consciousness. To the modern mind, she says, the idea that rocks have consciousness seems incredible. Yet, if we follow the implications of the observer universe down to the smallest level, then we must engage the notion that consciousness may be part of inanimate matter from the Big Bang onward. Wow. And she talks a little more about Teilhard de Chardin. So what does Zen have to say about this? There's some interesting koans in the Mumonkan that have to do with mind and things, etc. The 27th one says, neither mind nor Buddha, because why? We're trying to get away from words, from assigning some special category. So it's just what is, Nansen, the great teacher of Joshu, says, it is neither mind nor Buddha nor beings. Which is, of course, another way of saying, as Shibayama says in his commentary, the Lotus Sutra, the great Lotus Sutra, says, mind, Buddha, and ordinary beings, these three are not different. There you are. So in other words, he says, neither mind nor Buddha nor being, so you don't distinguish them. Because in fact, according to the sutra, mind, Buddha, and ordinary beings are not different. There you go. On every level. They ultimately are all connected and all come down to the same thing. The next one says that this is an interesting one, neither the wind nor the flag, number 29. You might know this one. The commentary quotes some of these truisms about, in Buddhism, every phenomenon is only due to mind. See how that fits in with what we've been saying. Nothing exists outside mind, if you consider mind in the broadest sense. Roshi Kennedy, I remember one day he was telling a story about him and his teacher, Bernie Glassman, who of course just died. And this was during Roshi Kennedy's training as a practitioner and a teacher, and he had this illumination one day. Wow, everything is mind. Everything really is just mind, like we just heard. And Roshi Bernie said, yes, very good. But then a few months later, Roshi Kennedy came back and said, everything is just what it is, beings. And Bernie Glassman said, yes, very good. Because they're both true, and there's no distinction. Wherever you are at any one moment, it's whatever you want to see. So the koan is, there was a wind flapping on the wind was flapping a temple flag on a flagpole, and so two monks were arguing, Is the wind moving or is the flag moving? And of course, stupidly, they get into a big argument about that. So the teacher comes along and says, the sixth patriarch, no less, Huai Neng, says, it's neither the wind nor the flag that is moving, it's your mind that's moving. So you can take that as a reproach on one level, shut up with all this dispute, shut up your mind, stop moving. But on a deeper level, well, it's all just energy moving, including mind, which is necessary for seeing the wind and flag. We're not separate from mind. The commentary goes on to distinguish between moving and non-moving, and makes a few comments like that, which you can see kind of absolute relative and relative and absolute. Emptiness and form is emptiness perhaps. Because the poem says, the wind moves, the flag moves, the mind moves, and all of them missed it. Because does it move or not move? Well, ultimately, does it matter? Because ultimately there's just this, now, here. What's moving? So then the famous distinction, the next one, where Basho is asked, what is Buddha? And he says, mind is Buddha. So there you go, mind is Buddha. But as it goes on to say, you got to wash your mouth out with soap, or you're caught with stolen goods, and trying to defend yourself if you say Buddha. What are you talking about? If you say mind, what are you talking about? So that's why, as some of you probably know, 3 koans later, he's asked the same question. What's Buddha? And the same master says, no mind and no Buddha. Because as soon as you start using words, you miss it, and you're making dualities. It's all one. And by the way, Shibuya in his commentary, actually, at least according to the translation, uses the phrase, absolute mind and true self. These more modern, expressions which do express very well true mind, which includes everything, all things, and it's our mind, whatever ours is. It's all that, and it's all unified. So that's what the experience should be. And I'll conclude with what she says, Elia DeLeo quotes, later in the speaking on a chapter precisely about mystics, mind, and matter. Mystics, mind, and matter is the next last chapter, which is what we're saying. Mystics unify mind and matter, and they are that. They are that. If you have that experience of one. But again, she quotes some interesting people. Neuroscientist Marjorie Woolacott says, the pan-Indian view, this Hindu view, is simply that pure consciousness is the substratum of everything. There's the classic statement of unity. And she says, what the Indian philosophers mean is that the one subtle order, pure consciousness, is thought to take the form of an infinite number of sub-orders. So that's the different levels of consciousness that we can inhabit. And we're one of them, our ego self. We're one level of consciousness. As Albert Einstein says, she said, we are part of a whole, though limited in time and space. Or as Wilber says, Ken Wilber, the ego is a contraction in the field of awareness. That's pretty good. The ego is a contraction in the field of awareness. They're contracted here. And don't mistake that for your true self. But it's, as we were saying before, it's a coagulation, it's a condensation. Contraction is another word for it. Not bad, just don't have the misfortune of thinking that's all you are, or primarily that. You're not. It's the whole that you are. The Western challenge is to free ourselves from this illusion of self-separateness. And she quotes, an African experience someone had with an African culture where they don't think about space in between people. All the space is part of a radiance that intersects. So you're never alone or separate. You're radiating out, and everybody else's radiation is part of that. It's all one. Just have to wake up to it. And then finally, some really interesting stuff here. Einstein arrived at his radically new understanding of space by thinking about the properties of light. If light is the constant against which all movement is measured, as we know with Einstein, and higher levels of consciousness bring about clarity, or more light, as the Christian mystic St. Simeon said, a light infinite and incomprehensible, then perhaps consciousness is light. So at all these different levels we can speak about degrees of light. Physical light, which is, you can't really, photons and waves and particles, you can't grab that either. But it's just all one. You talk about energy, you talk about light. It's the same thing. That's fascinating. The inner conscious light of the mystic may be compared with the light of physics. No separation. Physical light has no mass. It is not part of the material world, so there you go already. The same is true of consciousness. It's immaterial. Physical light seems to be fundamental to the universe. The light of consciousness is also fundamental. Without it, there would be no experience. Hence, physical reality and the reality of the mind seem to share the same common ground, as the Indian philosophers knew long ago. The ground of pure light or consciousness. God is light, Christians proclaim, and in him there is no darkness. So what is this light of God but pure consciousness, whereby the consciousness of self is consciousness of the other? As Meister Eckhart wrote, the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me. So there's just one light and one consciousness, all it. And then, this is the kicker, final thing. What we learn from the mystics is that consciousness bears with it a force of attraction. As Teilhard pointed out. As we are drawn to another, awareness increases. Isn't that true? If we're drawn to another, awareness increases. And as we become more aware of another, so are we drawn to the other, if we're pure enough. So awareness and consciousness go to, and drawing, being drawn to the other come together. So the more perfectly and purely we see, the more perfectly and purely we love. So love, light, consciousness, all the same. Ultimate reality. Consciousness and love are entangled, she says. One cannot be affected without impacting the other. And the insights of the mystic self appreciate that the union of consciousness and love unifies space. So that's why it's all one. You know, we transcend space and we transcend time. And that's our final line, the final sentence. Since language fails at understanding the depth of this experience, the best we can say is that this unitive experience is one of spaceless space and timeless time, in which the difference between self and other is dissolved in the oneness of love. In this abyss of light's fullness, without words to capture, sever, or constrict, reality is seen as an undivided whole. So no mind over matter, eh? It's all one light of consciousness, awareness, and energy. And the more you can let loose into that, the truer you'll be.